Hello, everyone. Welcome to this Radcast. Today I'm joined by Daniel, Jason, and Michael. And just as way of a brief introduction, we are four human beings who are grappling with the threat of near-term human extinction caused by abrupt climate change, in turn caused by a whole bunch of other things. And so we're grappling with the fundamental question is, where do we go from here? What do we do? And what's really unique about this conversation is, to my mind, this is the only conversation of its kind happening anywhere in the world where, through live recorded video conference, we are grappling openly, and in a way that I would also add in a way that's very vulnerable, because we don't have a bunch of answers that we're here to just present. We're like four organisms struggling with their imminent death, not only their death, but the death of their species. So we're kind of on this planetary death row here. And, we're here in cell block H, waiting for our number to come up. And we're saying, how do we bust out of here? That's a metaphor. So, it's Alcatraz all over again. And we're here in the mess hall figuring out how do we tunnel out of this rock. So with that, I'm going to throw it open to discussion. This is just a free-form kind of open discussion. We're going to try to keep our monologues to 3 minutes or less. And in the spirit of that, I'm going to go on mute and pass the hot potato to the center. And by the way, feel free to introduce yourself and give any sort of little...
Well, why don't you go ahead, man? Because I think that was kind of deep.
Oh, go ahead, Mike. I was just saying, feel free to introduce yourselves if you feel like it. This is a very unstructured format. Back to you, Michael.
Yeah, I was just passing the ball there to Dan. Because I think he has some value insight from his work as right, and a health professional, Dan. Because I think you bring a psychological perspective to the table that may be good for introducing the conversation we're having today.
Okay. My name is Dan Bader. I recently retired from the Chicago Department of Public Health. I've been engaged for many, many years in mental health issues from a prevention point of view. And once I became aware of Guy McPherson's work, and thinking of myself and I hope being a rational person, I could not deny the power of what it was he is presenting, and how overwhelming the threat of near-term extinction. And by near-term, he means maybe 5 to 10 years at this point. He can't know for sure. Nobody can. But that is such an immediate threat that there's what I would call a serious psychological, emotional problem that exists. From my mental health experience, when somebody is confronted with a future threat, an anxiety type of issue, the tendency is to try to avoid it, and the emotion itself makes you feel it's going to be a nightmare, which in this case, it's very true, and there's really not a lot you can do to help yourself other than to avoid or escape. But the problem is, when you really cannot avoid a threat like this, it's there. We're just waiting around, for maybe we're getting near to the 29th day in the lily pond, as some ecologists used to say. And so what has to happen is people have to train themselves to be able to cope with the fact that the threat may do them in and everybody else and everything. That's a very important piece. And I think for people to be able to assimilate that, and to be able to do that kind of work on that level, they need to have some sort of hope that actually we could solve this problem and that something could be done. If I can face the imminent threat and I can actually look at the loss of my life, my loved ones, everything, if I could do that but still know that something could be done, then I don't need to avoid thinking about it in essence. And I think that's a very critical kind of a piece. I'm going to let it go at that, guys.
Great. Thank you, Dan.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Dan. It strikes me as something you said there from this sort of a psychological perspective, that people understandably have defenses that they put up when it comes to their personal survival. Prospect something, when it comes to Guy McPherson and what I'm calling the narrative of now, for me the focus isn't so much on the inevitable destruction of humans, but of this opportunity for us to take our destiny, into our hands, as a self-conscious species, and to say, you know what, according to almost all, right, the scientific consensus among climatologists, conservation biologists, etc., we need to act now, right? That's the bottom line. Is we don't have as much time as we once thought. Even going back to like the 80s and 90s, right? We're at a point now where the consensus is we need to act now because we don't have as much time as we thought, right? Even if it's not 5 or 10 years, even if it was like 50 or 100 years, right? Even if that were the case, right? Considering all of the planetary problems that we're facing right now, 5 to 10 years is enough to tip the balance that we descend into this sort of chaos, right? This chaos scenario. If we take problems that have been persistent, like famine, right, hunger, starvation, etc., just as one example. There's so many others. We're dealing with a situation where there's already civil wars right now being fought that essentially have to do with a water shortage, right, which means mass crop failure, people fighting over very basic, right, resources. And, we're having this conversation at the very moment when this is a very much upon us. We're in the throes of it as a species. It of course affects more than the human species. The point is, we have right now the opportunity to take action, and we don't need to wait for the naysayers. We don't need to wait for people to get it. That's my experience. My perspective says that's not the way to go. The way to go is to speak to those people directly and honestly, and engage them in a conversation who are already having the conversation, but bringing them together in such a way where we're not just these disparate, groups and even factions, but that we're able to take action in a meaningful way.
Awesome. Thank you, Michael. Jason, you got any thoughts to jump in with? I've got some thoughts, but I wanted to give you an opportunity first.
So yeah, I think as Michael was talking, I think he made a good point about the chaos, and I think that's kind of a point that I've come to realize is that we can't really save ourselves if we let the world just crumble into chaos, and that partly has to do with the fact that we really would need an organized group of people probably to dismantle the 450 plus nuclear power stations, because if societies were to just break down, those things would definitely just go into decay to the point where one day they'd probably just melt down, and that's part of what the problem is. But I agree also that we can't wait until we've convinced every naysayer, because that'll take that'll never happen. I think we just need to focus on solutions and how we get there. You know, some of them, like the geo shading idea, is maybe a great idea, but that's a really big idea. There's a lot of stepping stones in between where we are now and a massive worldwide, you know, multi-nation effort to do a geo shading project. Or even if we were to try to cover the Arctic Ocean because of, you know, with white or a reflective surface so that, you know, it was protected from the sunlight. That's kind of down the road from maybe creating some awareness that we're here as a new, I don't know, a new collective of people who really want to solve the ecological, the, you know, environmental crises that we all face. I'd say that there's, you know, a pool of 50% of the people out there who maybe would totally agree that there's an ecological crisis. Maybe the one problem is not all of those people understand that our time is very limited on the scale of, like, we might have 10 years, we might have 30 years, and we're maybe lucky if we have 30 or 50 years to deal with this. So, you know, I have some of my own ideas, you know, just to try to explore, and I can mention those at any point, but maybe I'll give you, Jamen, an opportunity to sort of talk here.
Thank you, Jason. You know, we're just kind of putting stuff on the table now with you know, relatively short bursts, and so I'm just going to throw out some ideas, and I'll invite others to build off of those. But my first thought is that, you know, when we talk about the magnitude of the problem and that, you know, there are people that don't get it and governments don't work and this and that, I feel like we're complaining about kind of, you know, yesteryear's problems, because we are now in a completely whole new era where those old patterns are less and less applicable as the political structures crumble. Things are crumbling. That's the headline. We're cracking. Things are crumbling. And it's kind of like the Hemingway quote, he went broke slowly and then all at once. Well, we're crumbling all at once now. We still see it in slow motion because that's the nature of time these days. A lot can happen in a month, in a year. But here's I thought of a metaphor, analogy to kind of convey what I'm thinking here, which is that, you know, imagine there's a family in a rowboat, right? And there's two twin boys, and the water's choppy and whatnot, and then the two twin boys start fighting, right? That is obviously the least appropriate time at all for them to start fighting or wrestling or horsing around. And the parents just say, "Hey, stop, enough. We need to get out of the water. Look, when we're back at the backyard, you guys can wrestle around all you want. But right now, under these circumstances, it's totally inappropriate." And so what it occurs to me is right now is literally the moment for the grown-ups in the room or in the boat to say to the rest of humanity, "Hey, stop. This is inappropriate. Look at what's happening. I don't care to what extent you get it or not. These are the facts. Be responsible for them. And it's time for us to radically transform exactly what we're doing in our rowboat right here, right now." And I'll give you an example of what I did this last weekend in the direction of that. So once a year, we have the solstice parade. This last weekend was the solstice. We had the solstice parade in Seattle. And at the end of the parade, I was standing under the statue of Lenin, and there's all these people milling about. And I started screaming to the crowd at the top of my lungs, "Wake up, Seattle. We are staring down the barrel of an ice-free Arctic this summer for the first time in 3 million years." How many of you knew that? And occasionally somebody would raise their hand, because I said this several times as people were walking about. And when they'd raise their hand, I'd say, "Well, do you know the implications of that?" I'm coming on 3 minutes now, so I'm just going to mute and pass the ball back into the group.
So let me say a couple of things that have come to my mind listening to you guys talk. I think that I agree, so much that it's very, very important to try to preserve civilization, the structures, because if that goes, it pretty much is game over, no doubt. In a lot of ways that could go. I do think that, I guess I would say this, as a human being, what I would want to know is this. I want to know what is going on with the average global temperature and why that's important. Hardly anybody knows that. Most people, very well educated people, are clueless about it. It's not something they were taught, and it's not something which is discussed in the media. So I would want to know what is it, what is the significance, and I'm just using these numbers, of if in March 2015, from 1750 to March 2015, the average global temperature went up 0.85 centigrade, and today, right now, it's maybe at 1.5 or so centigrade. That's a very big jump. And I'd like to know, as a human being, well, what's the significance of that? And maybe I want to monitor it as we go into the future. I'd like to hear reports about what's going on. I'd like to hear reports about what's happening with the meltdown in the Arctic and why that's important. And again, as I mentioned, Jamen, in our conversation last week, when I get up in front of people in these very small forums and can make some comments, I say, if I was a young person in my late teens, 20s, or 30s, I would want to watch what's going on with the average global temperature, et cetera, before I decide to have a child. 2-3 years, if you're that age group, isn't a big leap. And it would be smart to kind of watch that. All right, guy, I'm getting off. Oh,
I wasn't signaling for you to get off, if that's what you're reading into.
Okay, so everybody can hear me okay right now?
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah. So that's something which I think is really important. And I've said this a number of times. I posted it, I think, to somebody on Arctic News on Facebook. Most people can handle that fairly well. Yeah, this is a dire emergency. Let me know what's really going on. And then let me at least have the opportunity. To me, it's an ethical issue, for example, where I could decide in the next 2 or 3 years whether I want to have a child or not. That's a big deal for most people. But of course, the problem is, how do you get that out there in an effective way without arousing too much real anxiety that can't be managed by populations? And I think that's a practical problem. Okay, I'm going to check out.
Great, thank you, Dan. Mm-hmm.
I have something to say along what Dan was saying. My own personal story, I guess I could tell. I have a daughter who is almost 6 months old, and that was my first child, and I didn't really. I was aware that there was like a definite, ecological, environmental crisis before that happened in my life. But I only found out about Guy McPherson and his real message of abrupt climate change. The idea that there's a bunch of things that are going to kind of unfold with the temperature rising by that 2 degrees or not even, or of the ice disappearing from the Arctic for sure, and the methane coming out of the ground, and yada, yada, yada. And I think that it's interesting that you say that people ought to really consider having kids, because if the world's winding down, maybe everybody should just not have kids. They should just enjoy their lives and kind of give up. I want to say that having a child and knowing this message has changed, having a child changed my life, but having a child and knowing that she may not have a real chance at growing up even, because we face literally possibly near-term human extinction because of abrupt climate change. I mean, it's I guess when I had a kid, I decided it really made me really feel like now I have to get involved. Whereas before I could throw up my hands and say, fuck it, whatever. I don't care what happens to the planet, I think that really changed in me when I had a kid, and I was like, you know what? It's much more meaningful to me now. And I guess, where I thought maybe we could focus our time if we want to talk about where we're going to go with solutions is I kind of wanted to know, like, Dan and Michael, do you think, starting meetups to spread this message is a good way to start doing it and having more conversations and bringing more people in? Maybe one person can focus on that, or is it, getting a physical place together and starting real communities in different places to actually talk about these issues and work on engineering solutions for tomorrow? Work on, either building these, a machine to suck carbon and different gases out of the atmosphere so that we can maintain balance? Or is the geoshading idea a plausible idea? We probably need to work on all of them at the same time, really, so we have backup plans for our backup plans. But I mean, some of those ideas, like I said, are bigger ideas. So how do we get there? Was the community cafe sort of like the idea that Jamen laid out of bringing the community cafes somewhere and really trying to eliminate hunger and get people to be more self-sufficient and sort of change the culture to more of this caring, compassionate? Like, is that where we start so that we build up the message and we get people to understand it and hop on board with the conversation? Where do people see that? I mean, I have different ideas of, like, the urban farm guy, which I mentioned to Jamen, who do really great things in this country, and they have a whole video online you can watch, Urban Farm Guy. Also, this guy Marcin Jukowski. I can barely pronounce his last name, but he talks about, like, open source technology and the global the global, like, village starter kit, and literally being able to build your own tractor. And I think this open source idea is a much better idea for a community than having to buy, having corporate power literally control the media, control the government, control everything. So we no longer even have an institution or a group of people we can go and stand in front of and talk about it. How do we, get started on this, I guess, is, where I would theoretically want to move to. And I guess I'll hand it over.
Great. Thank you, Jason. Michael? Anything to add at this point? No pressure. Okay, Michael's. Yeah. Go ahead.
I'd just jump in and to say, Jason, thank you for sharing, your situation, because it's so really difficult to have to wrestle with the we're in a showdown with near-term extinction, and to have a young child, it's just it takes it to a completely different dimension. But I would say that you probably, until this gets solved, hopefully, or not, but you would probably not elect to have any more children at this point in time. And I do think that, again, I just say, if I were a young person and I was in my late teens, 20s or 30s, I would pretty much, if I knew this, I would say, God, we got to do something right now. We've got to get this solved. And I think I'm going to wait before I have my own child for a little bit of time so I can see what really gets done. And for people who are in your situation, and I'll tell you, when I talk about this to somebody who I'm close to, most people tell me to just simply shut up. They don't want to hear it. They basically, you know, I've got grandchildren. I have children. I can't be listening to this. The denial is very, very in your face. And again, I do think it's a problem, but I think if authority, people who are in authority, you know, people respect their intellectuals, they respect doctors, you know, lawyers, ministers, religious figures. There's lots of authority figures that people kind of look up to. And I think it's very important to be able to get these individuals to look at this reality and then to be able to help input to solutions for their, you know, the groups that they reach out and touch and influence. I think that's an important thing. Okay, I'm going to check out.
All righty. Great stuff, you guys. Great topics that we're delving into. You know, for me, I want to interject something, and this, you know, gets back to what I was talking about before about, you know, like what behavior is appropriate and inappropriate. What I'm really getting to the root of is that we are on the tipping point of an absolute cultural transformation. That's what's clear to me. And because the current culture is just so unsustainable and it's causing everything to crack around us, it's simply a matter of, you know, how big are the chunks of plaster that need to hit you on the head before you wake up to the fact that the castle is crumbling, right? Folks like us who are forward thinking and, you know, are good at recognizing patterns relatively early on relative to the masses, you know, with the first tremor, we said, wait a second, there's an earthquake happening. And other people like, shut up, blah, blah. No problem. Well, now, you know, the tremors are getting bigger and powder is starting to fall from the old plaster ceiling, right? And now we're basically in freak out mode because if it was clear to us, you know, a year ago, it's crystal clear to us now. What I'm saying is the chunks of plaster are only going to get bigger. And so this problem of, you know, mass delusion of society, I think is a self-correcting one, because as exponential climate change progresses, now on the time scale of weeks, we're looking at probably weeks until we have an ice-free Arctic. People are just going to continue to wake up. So what I think is a crucial opportunity that we have right here on this meeting that we're having right now and in subsequent meetings is that we begin to chart a new culture for humanity. And the best way, I think, to manifest that, to make that happen, is to simply live it, to simply live and breathe it, to simply be the change that we want to see in the world. What is that change? That change is, what do we do? And Jason, you're hitting the nail on the head with, well, let's look at this, let's look at that, let's look at actual solutions. You know, and so we've got solutions all the way from, you know, kind of the biosphere, sort of local community area, to the you know, to the planetary scale. And we need to operate on all these different scales, as well as the cultural scale, as well as the political scale. It's like we've got all these different layers of the onion that constitute life on Earth, human life on Earth, and life of the planet. And we need to address them all holistically. And I think really the first big transformation is the cultural transformation that we are affecting right now, that we're doing right now by transforming our own culture. Just look at how we're dialoguing and interacting. So I believe it all starts right here, right now with us. And with that, I'll pass the ball to y'all. And I'll just comment, it looks like Michael has accidentally dropped off, but back to you, Jason.
All right. So I think we're all basically agreeing, and I think it's interesting to hear Dan sort of talk about the mental health side of it, because I do agree with you, Dan, about when you were talking about you know, aggression to a tribal way of consciousness, a tribal way of thinking, the way to sort of just kind of clutch religion when you're in the face of of this. I guess to a Christian, it might be okay because they're still going to go to heaven with all their relatives at the end of the day. But if you think that idea is a little silly, even if maybe you believed in reincarnation, I guess reincarnation would be coming to an end. But, so I think what I guess I'm trying to get to is I feel like, more and more people are going to wake up. I think Jamen is right. And I think that, if we are going to be the change, I think we really need to be able to create a decent sized movement of people who are really brought together by being like, we need to change the cultural, background of what we're doing. Or I think there's a lot of people out there who are, I think the whole Bernie crowd could maybe, for instance, get on our message and could hear this and say, you know what, these people are right. At least they're trying to come up with solutions. But I think that has to be an important part of it. I think we always have to remain positive and continuously talk about solutions and not try to drown on to people about the crisis and the problem. And I think, we can, maybe create a list of these different ideas that people can join and say, okay, I'm an engineer, so I'm interested in trying to work on, geoshading or creating some sort of reflective surface for the Arctic Ocean stretched between boats or floats, or I don't know. And, I'm in agriculture. I'm looking to try to, close up the agriculture and try to find a way to feed as many people as possible, even considering that temperature may get so hot that wheat and corn won't just grow outdoors any longer at some point. Because I think at some point the conversation does have to come down to, okay, we're probably going to lose some of the shit we got because the temperature is going to get too high. So how do we still, we may be going into the thick of the crisis, but it's going to take everything we got. So, we just got to start trying to create a movement. And what I guess the question is, I think me and Jamen got to a good point last week that I think is maybe a good point to say, but reaching out to people who are talking to a wider breadth of people and seeing if they're comfortable trying to do stuff with us and maybe talk about what we're doing without, maybe they don't even really have to mention Guy McPherson necessarily, but reaching out to people like I mentioned, Chris Hedges, for instance, talks about a lot of economic issues. And he just put a new article on Truthdig today about the environment and that everybody's in denial. I haven't read it yet. It's on my phone right here. But I think reaching out to people like him, maybe reaching out to Noam Chomsky, maybe reaching out to Daniel Pinchbeck, who wrote How Soon Is Now, and really trying to get those people involved too. I think even having maybe the first thing would be to try to start having meetups to get people who care about the environment, to try to come out and say, well, hey, look, politically in this country and in the world and economically, we haven't been able to move towards a better economic, social culture. And politically, it's like almost like a lost cause in this country with the election of who. And so, people are going to need to come together and, maybe I think it'll have to be like a physical places in different areas where people come together and say, we're going to honestly live what we're talking about in a sustainable community where we practice what we preach and we try to spread the word. The first steps maybe I see is just starting meetups and reaching out to some of these people. And I only listed a few people, but maybe Naomi Klein and the guy who does The Intercept, Jeremy Scahill, just saying to continuously, meetups. So starting a conversation in our local areas, whatever community we live in, to see if we can't get people to come and show an interest and also reaching out to people like Daniel Pinchbeck, Noam Chomsky, Chris Hedges, Naomi Klein, people who are talking about these issues of climate change and other things.
Good stuff. Yeah, good stuff. Yeah, I think all those things are really crucial, because all of these things for me feed right into the cultural transformation that we're instigating right here and right now. The culture of doing meetups in your local community, the culture of doing these video conferences and talking about these things, the culture of then systematically breaking it down and maybe having, one series focused on geoshading, another focused on agriculture, another focused on communities of the future, the economy of the future. I mean, that's the vision, that's the dream of collective intelligence. And so what we're doing right now is kind of backfilling to create the cultural transformation that will then, support all of these transformations in our set of living arrangements, economy, agriculture, et cetera. And I just wanted to point out that the reason that that Daniel and Jason are here in the first place is because they found out about us, speaking of me and Michael and the rest of the kind of Radish community, they found out about us through Guy McPherson. And that's because Guy McPherson is relatively more famous than we are. And many of the other names that you mentioned, Jason, I see as very much other vectors to bring in more people, because once we hit a critical mass, and I don't know what that critical mass is, maybe it's 100 of us who are engaged in a weekly basis. I think that's going to be incredibly powerful. I already feel the power of the 4 of us coming together. And I want to welcome back Michael, who I think had accidentally dropped off or had a connectivity issue or something. So I'll ask Michael to feel free to jump in next. And as a segue to what Michael's going to say, whatever that may be, I wanted to comment about something that Michael taught me about, which is the concept of the imagined community or the imagined culture. You see, before the modern American culture could come into being, it first had to be imagined. And then there were some progressive writers who would write newspaper articles, who would write books, novels that really described and put into form this new American culture. And it was the mass media that was able to propagate it. Well, now with Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and all this, we can propagate much more quickly. So I'm very much encouraged by what Jason said. Let's create all these vectors, reach out to people, build this community, build this movement, because as our numbers grow, we create a whole new culture. And just like when you watch some radical sitcom in the 70s or 80s, it was just like, wow, that's totally different. And you're like peering in on this culture. Well, that started to impact American culture. So media impacts culture. So Michael, I'm going to pass the hot potato to you and ask you to feel free to build on that theme or anything else you want to talk about.
Sure. Obviously, I missed a great deal of what was said previous today. So I hope what I say isn't, too much of a departure. But continuing on with what you were saying, Jamie, the right of communication is at our disposal. That doesn't mean it's a given, right? Because what we've also seen is a certain application. It's often referred to the siloing effect, right, where people tend towards their own. So that has been, I would say, more. And so we can't overlook that at all. That said, right now, perhaps for the first time in history, it's not the technology per se that's holding us back. In particular, the communication technology. One information scientist I recall listening to, who was giving a lecture at Berkeley, where you attended, Jamen. He said probably the single most
and Daniel as well, by the way. I just wanted to mention, but go ahead.
And Dan, yeah, I didn't know that. Yeah, Dan, yeah. Well, Dan is the man. Yeah, I went to Berkeley. Yeah. Anyway, and I get back to you with his name. It was been some time since I listened to his lecture, but basically, he said that the one thing above all else that probably would have surprised those who are part of, the computer revolution, was that computers would be used, right? That wasn't really on the radar, right? People were thinking in terms of computational power, right? In terms of using it as an efficient tool to, consolidate, process information, and sharing it, but not in some way that we would recognize as direct communication. Now, that's one of the biggest, if not the single, most important parts, even I would argue bigger than e-commerce, of the internet, especially as we moved into the internet 2.0, right? Where you're not just simply, downloading a bunch of, data or information that's there, put there primarily by professionals who knew what they were doing. But 2.0, where it's basically this constant give and take, to the point where we're having this conversation today online. I'm in Oxford. I don't know where you all are because I missed the introduction there. But Jamin's in Seattle. I can see that. Dan, you in Chicago?
Yep, Dan's in Chicago and Jason's in Long Beach, Southern California.
Oh, Long Beach. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And so here we are. Granted, there's been a few connectivity issues. Nonetheless, we're having this conversation online, right? And that's kind of one of the big surprises of the computer revolution. I would call it the digital revolution. It really started with those, that binary code that made it all possible to compress the information or the data in such a way that's efficient enough to carry on these conversations real time. But anyway, to cut to the chase, here we are having a conversation online, in real time. But not only that, not only is it happening in what we would call relatively synchronic fashion, meaning at the same time, but that there's a diachronic dimension to it too. What I mean by that is that this conversation is being recorded. It can and may well be posted for other people to find, cataloged, perhaps ranged under a topic within a taxonomy, whatever the organization may be, that people can find, and then they can actually continue on that conversation, kind of like a runner in a relay race, takes the baton. And so, we're on the cusp of something very profound, because now the limits are no longer technological in terms of moving the conversation forward, right? Now we're dealing more with a cultural revolution that needs to take advantage of those tools that are, and it's by no means a given. It has to happen voluntarily. It has to happen by design, right? That's the essence of what it means to be self-conscious, right? A self-conscious society, taking the reins of something for the first time, and actually, directing the history of humanity.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you, Michael. I just wanted to point out our monologues are getting more on the 5-6 minute mark, and that's okay. I just wanted to acknowledge.
I was just making up for lost time there, David.
No, I know, and
I
that's totally
I figured
fine.
I had at least 5 turns.
No, and you did, and I wasn't talking about you. I'm just talking about generally. I was just observing it and saying that from my standpoint, that's okay. We had talked before about trying to keep it to 3. I'm just saying, I'm okay opening it up a bit. Dan, back to you.
Okay. Yeah. So again, listening to the flow of the conversation, I think that Chris Hedges' name was mentioned, Noam Chomsky, Naomi Klein, who's written kind of extensively about these issues. I even recall reading something that she wrote where she was talking about potential geoengineering interventions, and saying, you know, of course, when it's back against the wall time, everybody will try to do something. But for that to happen, again, I do think that more people who have, particularly who have a voice that really people look up to. Chris Hedges, I remember, I can't remember who he was talking to, but he was interviewing a young guy, I think he's from the Northwest, who was concerned with environmental issues, and he'd been in prison, and he had a background in theology, as Chris Hedges does, and at some point in their discussion, they actually pretty much acknowledged to one another that, you know, we are looking at potential extinction. I've heard Noam Chomsky recently say things like, you know, you better wake up to this because we really are at the abyss, something like that. So I follow because of some of the economic writings. I look at Paul Craig Roberts, who mostly is talking about economic and legal issues, but he came out with a column where he went to the climate change and pretty much said the same thing. And I think that if the message can get out there that we're facing this very, very imminent threat, and that it is time to get to the solutions, and let's, you know, the idea of radical collective intelligence, which I was so happy to hear at that Sierra Club presentation. I think it makes good conceptual sense that we need so many people to contribute. People have different areas of expertise. They have different, you know, bases of knowledge, and to get people working on the solutions locally through this kind of video conferencing, it's definitely the way to go. And hopefully the momentum can really be picked up, and again, before it's too late. And even though, Jamen, you said, you know, if we do go ice-free in the Arctic this summer, that's probably a real tipping point, no doubt. Or if it happens next year, whenever it happens, it's a big tipping point. But I do, you know, I've always, when Guy McPherson says, you know, other people know this, I'm not the only one who knows it. People maybe up in high levels of the Air Force or the Navy, who have a responsibility to be looking at these things, they may know it. But the problem, I think one of the problems is that there is an assumption that if it gets propagated too widely, you're going to have not only a regression to kind of a tribal mentality very quickly. It's already happening anyway. But that what you may start to see is a lot of people kind of breaking down emotionally, mentally, in ways that are very, very destructive. And so I think there's a general tendency to hold back. But I think at this point in time, you have to take the chance that if you can couple solutions with the dire nature of what is there, enough people could take it in. And we do need a big cultural revolution. So I'm gonna check out here.
Great, thank you, Dan. Jason, are you ready to fire away, or shall I jump in?
Yeah, can you guys hear me? They of course have decided to mow, even though I'm doing this very important video call conference with you guys. They've decided to start mowing the lawn out here, so I had to like put my head up here, so I turned the video off for a second. So hopefully you can hear me.
We can hear you great, actually. Yeah, the background noise tends to be worse for Jason than for the rest of us, but we can hear you fine. Say on, Jason.
here's my question, I guess, for Michael, because you came in a little late from what I said, which is fine. But you touched on something about what Radish is supposed to be and what the collective intelligence through the website, howtochangetheworld.com. And so I guess I was wondering by those comments how, you're saying that a technology age and the information age is really awesome that we can have this system all put together. Do you see it as being important for us to start like meetups in our local area? I mean, I kind of couldn't hear that one part where Dan said where he lived and Michael said where he is. I think he's in Europe. But I think that, getting people like Dan and Jason in different places of the country to maybe start a meetup so people who are aware of the issue can actually get together and start sort of at least meeting each other and trying to really hash out a real solution, whether that's a plausible direction for maybe getting a physical place to start a physical community where people are really living like this, and maybe using open source technology to start trying to actually solve the problems of tomorrow, where they're not so worried about, where they have the freedom to not be so worried about getting a paycheck, and how do we build a community where people can go and basically live for free and have, some people working on agriculture to feed these people, because this is like, in a way, that's where I kind of see it having a cultural revolution. As I talked to Jamen, would include, it's a human right to have, a decent meal every day and a place to lay your head. So I guess the question being just sort of, do starting meetups and really physically meeting versus just meeting online, does that make sense to everybody? And how to do that and get that word out there and how to best do that. I mean, I did, like you said, me and Dan both came across Jamen through just seeing, I mean, a friend had to tell me to watch it, but through seeing, that thing with Guy McPherson. But anyway, I'm going to stop talking now.
All right, Michael, I'll let you respond since Jason asked you a couple questions directly.
Yeah.
I've got some Horseshack ideas for how we can bring it all together. So, but first to you, Michael. Thanks.
Thank you, and thanks for that, Dan and Jason. And by the way, unfortunately for me, especially since we've had some connectivity issues here, I have to get rolling pretty soon after my comments. I have to catch a train. But anyway, and I'm in Oxford, in the UK. But anyway, my immediate reaction to that question about meetups is absolutely talking. I've mentioned to Jamen more than once that having meetups would be a beautiful idea, because we've always envisioned this as something that's both online and in person. And we've had that statement any number of times as kind of a part of our mission. And just for the record, because of the lawnmower in the background or whatnot, what I was saying about technology is that it's no technology that's holding us back. That the technology piece, even though that continues to progress, in a way that is.
I'm sorry. It is or it is not technology that's holding us back. Clarify that real quick.
Yeah, it is no longer technology that's holding us back in terms of having, for example, real-time conversations, information sharing, etc. That's not that doesn't appear to me to be an inhibitor. So is yes, technology, but now that we have the technology to have these conversations and other such ways of collaborating, right, in terms of even developing a radical form of collective intelligence with all the machine learning, artificial intelligence, and so on, that's no longer what's holding us back. I would say with meetups, because I think that coupled with online conversation and even perhaps the two together, right, could be a very powerful way to move the conversation forward, and not only conversation for conversation's sake, but to actually take action.
Amen. Amen. Beautiful. And that's where I want to bust in with my Horseshack but before that, I just wanted, since I'm invoking Horseshack from Welcome Back, Kotter, I'm just going to take a little musical break here of about a minute or so, play a little bit of that great song, and just get up and dance for a little bit, and invite the rest of you to do the same if you're so inspired. All right, so we're just going to take a minute musical break, and then I'll be back with my Horseshack
Welcome back. Your dreams were your ticket out. Welcome back to that same old place that you laughed about. Well, the names have all changed since you hung around, but those dreams have remained and they've turned around. Who would have thought that we'd jump? Who would have thought that we'd jump? There, where we need you. There, where we need you. The tease him a lot, 'cause we got him on the spot. Welcome back. Welcome.
All right. How's that for a musical break? Okay, so here's my, with the spirit of that, here's my Horseshack So just taking this all in, everything we talk about, Jason, with your taking the lead on the meetups, Michael piling on that. Here's my What if we have a standing weekly video conference where it's, you know, the four of us and we have guests and whatnot, but the first half hour of that, okay, could be we have kind of like a check-in on the local chapters. Okay, in Long Beach, Jason had a meetup this last week, blah, blah, blah. For more about that, go to our website. Here in Seattle, we're starting our first meetup, blah, blah, blah. Here's a brief review on that. We had 10 people show up. We talked about this, this, and this. For more on that, go to the website. Dan in Chicago is organizing the first meetup. If you're interested in going, it'll be at the whatever community center at Diversity, blah, blah, blah. You know, we'll see you there. And Dan will report back. So we start to have kind of like a hub and spoke. The hub is the online, the standing weekly recorded hangout. And that's where we have, you know, check-ins from across the country. And then what this will do is it'll start to create both the perception and the reality that there is a new community forming. At first, you know, with a lot of emphasis on the United States, because, you know, we're all Americans and this is where we are and this is in English, but gradually expanding to other countries. And then what's going to happen is a planetary, emphasis on the word planetary, a planetary community, and for the first time, a planetary culture and planetary revolution. And a feeling that we're all in this together. This isn't just some American thing. This is a planetary thing. I think that could be a real absolute game changer. So with that, I'm going to go on mute, maybe pass it off to Dan, and then to you, Jason.
Okay, yeah, I think that that is a good kind of a framework. I'd be, you know, very, very happy to try to see if something can be organized in Chicago. I know there's lots of people interested, and we could try to find something. We'd have to find some venue here in Chicago where people could come together. You know, we have. I mentioned I go to a place called the College of Complexes, where they have weekly meetings on all sorts of topics, where somebody gives a presentation, then you have a question period, and then anybody who wants to can get up for about 4 or 5 minutes, comment on the presentation, or talk about anything. And it's a very, very rewarding kind of an atmosphere, even though at times it gets a little rough on the edges, you know, so to speak. But there's so few forums that even exist today. I remember, you know, when I was going to Berkeley back in, you know, the late 60s, early 70s, you had all sorts of places you could go to and have these kind of public conversations. We don't really have it anymore. It's not really something that goes on within the universities anymore, which have, kind of become taken over to some degree by corporate culture. And so I know that that's a very rewarding atmosphere. I think people would really be enthusiastic about doing it, and to get it spread around the globe would be just such a wonderful thing. And because it is a planetary problem, and it is, and as people say, it's so dire, it's so critical that something must be figured out and solutions arrived at and implemented. And having guests who have some interesting ideas and thoughts, it sounds great. Okay, I'm gonna check it out.
Awesome. Thank you, Dan. Jason, what do you think?
All right. I mean, I guess it sounds like everybody thinks it's an idea. So maybe Dan can work on trying to get something going where he's at. You can try to get something going in Seattle, right?
Absolutely. In fact, I've got more to say about the community we're building right here in Seattle in a minute, but say on, Jason.
Well, I'd love to maybe hear you touch on that. I should let you all know that my computer is letting me know that it is quickly running out of batteries, and I have nowhere to plug it in, and I have lawnmowers everywhere. So
sounds pretty dystopian. Sounds like an
sounds like the end of the world over here in Long Beach.
Well, it's starting in Long Beach. You heard it first here. Okay, but okay. Well, in that case, say I'm okay. You direct it then, Jason, because you're the one running it.
I'm just gonna say, I guess I'm gonna try to start getting maybe do a meetup here. I can talk to some friends who maybe would be interested in joining me, and see if I just can't get it going over the next month or two or something. I think everybody should look to do that. I think also if we got anybody or anybody or people start coming on and contacting you at Radish, or once we get the, howtochangetheworld.com up, when we get people in different cities, ask them to sort of take the lead and try to create something, get more people involved, get more people into the conversation, because that's the way to try to grow the movement from there. And I guess I have to say that's it. So why don't we can end maybe with you, Jamen, talk for 5 minutes. I'm going to maybe just say goodbye right now, because at some point I do need to basically close my computer down. It's going to shut down. But maybe even if you wanted, we could have another talk next Monday, starting at maybe 1 o'clock or at 9 o'clock, 9 to about 10:45, 11, or 1 o'clock till 3 or something like that. So
sure. And of course, you're talking Pacific time, which is totally cool. I'm game. I'm totally game with all that. And I see a thumbs up from Dan. And so let me just mention briefly what we're doing here in Seattle. So I went to the Seattle City Council meeting this last week, Monday, a week ago today, and I got up, and for a meeting, I spoke to the city council and the media and everyone who was listening, and I invoked, a human extinction, 10-year time frame, Guy McPherson, and I concluded by saying, so it's time to get absolutely aggressive on this. One city can make a difference. If not Seattle, who? So let's step up and do this. And I got a huge applause, made up a little list of people at the end of the city council meeting. And I said, I'll email you guys. Maybe we can do some meetups. Maybe we can meet, whatever. And so we're starting to kind of form that now. My point is, I went to an existing event, and because the city council that day was going to be voting on the Paris Climate Accord. And the larger point is there are standing meetups going on in all these big cities. Dan's in Chicago. You're in, Long Beach, LA area. we could go to existing meetups, meet people there, and then when we have an opportunity to speak, we say our piece and say, look, we're working on, radically transforming our world.
That's a good idea. I'm going to fucking write that down right now. Excuse my language. That's
no problem. No, it's time to start dropping the F-bombs because we're out of time.
Yeah.
I was screaming my head off in the Fremont neighborhood on Saturday afternoon. I mean, just bellowing out to the public, wake up, Seattle. And then, people would come around and we'd have conversations. So it's time to do this anywhere and everywhere we possibly can. The house is on fire. It's time to start screaming. So with that, I'll pass it off to you, Dan. What do you think? What are you hearing in all this?
Yeah, no, I really like that. I like the idea of going around to existing places where people are talking about issues and saying something. Also, I understand that Guy McPherson is coming to Chicago on July 13th. They haven't specified where he's going to be speaking yet, but I will definitely be there and use the opportunity to get those people who are knowledgeable enough to attend to get together. I also would just quickly say, one of the advocacy groups that I participate in, and I'm in about 4 of them, last weekend when they came together, one of the women in the group is a science teacher. She actually gave a presentation on climate change and was talking about it in a way where, we're going to have climate refugees. We need to see how that impacts our social justice issues, et cetera, our housing issues. And everybody was, it was a good presentation. And at the end of it, I just kind of, I said, I want to intensify it a little bit. And I mentioned the Arctic meltdown. So I do think that consciousness is getting raised. And, I'm retired. I have a good deal of flexibility in my time. And I'm going to start going around and seeing if we can, engage people here in the Chicago area. There's a lot of people are very active. They know about this stuff on some level, but it hasn't come to a point where, again, you're metaphorically using the F word and just simply saying we have to do something now. Okay.
Great stuff, you guys. Really great stuff. Yeah, I think Jason, looks like Jason just ran out of battery. So, but good thing is we're recording this, so Jason and Michael can watch what they missed. But I really think we're onto something here, because the thing is, the best way to lead a parade is to find a parade and walk in front of it. We have been walking in relative isolation, you in Chicago, me in Seattle, Jason in Long Beach, Michael in Europe. We've been walking in relative isolation here. And now we heard a dog whistle. And it's like, wait a second, there's more of us? And now we're connecting. This is just the beginning. This is like the critical mass. This is just the seed of the snowflake that's going to propagate into a snowball. And going to the meetups, putting the word out in all these different ways. I'm going to start tweeting for the first time. I've never tweeted before. And so I get to tweet about all this stuff. So we're going to, through all of our individual efforts, we're creating this planetary movement and indeed planetary community. And we're going to use these video conferences as sort of a hub, but then the spokes are really, all politics is local. It all happens at the local level. That's where we really root down in person with our local communities. And of course, we inform them about the hub. So they're all able to watch kind of like the weekly summary and, snippets and reports from local chapters throughout the planet. This is sort of the beginnings of a new form of governance, not government, but governance. We're figuring out how to self-govern here. That's how I see how profound this is.
Yeah, and I guess what I said earlier in the conversation, having some reliable data on the actual, average global temperature, this kind of thing, and somewhere ultimately where people can go to access that, kind of to update, just like you want to know what's the weather report, what's going on in the Arctic. Now, Arctic News, which is a great site, but they really, it's not a day-to-day, even week-to-week kind of thing where people can check in and say, okay, this is what's happening. This is the threat, and this is also what we are doing to try to forestall and correct all of the damage that has been done. That would be something which would be really valuable, because when I give that 0.85, 17, that thing, it's me, it's Dan Bader saying it. Who are you to be talking about the climate? That's not your thing, kind of a thing. So it goes in one ear and out the other, and it's not really retained, even if I do it over and over, again, periodically. So that I think would be something which would really be helpful, to have some sort of a reliable source where that information is being provided to those who'd like to access it.
Totally. And I see that that's a crucial part of the collective intelligence, is to provide all this data with daily updates where it's relevant. And with the Arctic ice, it literally is relevant on a daily basis. And so, and part of that is so that we all have a common ground of information, a common basis, because otherwise we're each just kind of Googling and going off in a zillion different directions. We need unity. We need a common core. That's not to say don't stray beyond that core, obviously. Go, I mean, this is a very open source, but even the open source, anyone can contribute what they want, but there is a common core that evolves and takes form. So I'm talking about a common core of information and updates and data, which is your idea. It's a brilliant one. So let's, there's a lot of great ideas that are coming out of this, and I think more and more are going to come as we continue to reach out and expand from this tiny little nucleus, of a couple dozen of us. We're going to have other hangouts later today. And in fact, I'll send those to you if you'd like to
Great.
to join.
I'd love that if you would. Yeah.
Okay. Well, the very next one's at 2:00 Pacific. And it's with Doctress Newtopia, and we had an amazing talk, this amazing meetup this last week. In fact, if you have a chance to watch that, I highly recommend that one. With Dr.
I did see it. I did see it.
Oh, wonderful! Thank you. Awesome.
Yeah,
Awesome.
I think you sent it to me, possibly.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, anyway, 2:00 Pacific today with Doctress Newtopia. That's definitely a go. And we've chunked out 2 hours, and in fact, the second hour is precisely building the first community here in Seattle. And so we may have some people joining from the city council meeting last week. So anyway, from 2 to 4, if you're game, I'd love to have you for whatever time you're available.
I may be able to jump in. I may not. If I'm unable to, you would send it to me though.
Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely. Because it's going to be public. Yeah, it'll be public.
Okay.
All right, this has been so cool. I'd like to kind of close with playing the full song of "Welcome Back, Cotter," since we've just gotten a little tease of it, and because what a beautiful song, what a great way. So if there aren't any objections, I'll just play that, and at the end of that song, we'll just close it out, and we'll look forward to seeing everyone next time. Any final words before the music?
Are we going to next Monday? Did we say what time? Was that going to be? 9.
But I say 9:00 Pacific is a great time. Let's kick off let's make it a standing thing, and we can refine the time as to what works best for all. But I think that's a good start. 9 a.m. Pacific. All right, wonderful. All right, well, let's go to our musical close, and I'll look forward to seeing you in a few hours. And it's been wonderful hanging with you, Dan, and with Jason, and with Michael. Thanks so much to everyone.
Talk to you soon. Great.
All right, talk to you soon. Cutting to the music.
Welcome back. Your dreams were your ticket out. Welcome back to that same old place that you laughed about. Well, the names have all changed since you hung around. But those dreams have remained, and they've turned around.
I got it.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
I have an injured knee.
Yeah. Hey, we got Michael joining. Michael, we're at the musical close. Let me just pause for a second here. Michael, we're just doing kind of a musical close to a great program here. So, and you're on the train there. That's awesome. I'm going to put you on the big screen, and we'll keep rolling with the music. Brilliant.
Welcome back, welcome back. We always could spot a friend. Welcome back. And I smile when I think how it must have been. And I know what a scene you were learning in. Was there something that made you come back again? And what could ever lead you? What could ever lead you? Out here where we need you. Where we need you. Every piece of my life, we got him on the spot. Welcome back. Welcome back, welcome back, welcome back. Welcome back, welcome back. Yeah, we tease him a lot. Welcome back, welcome back. 'Cause we got him on the spot. Welcome back, welcome back. Yeah, we tease him a lot. 'Cause we got him on the spot. Welcome back. Welcome back, welcome back, welcome back. Welcome back, welcome back, welcome back. Welcome back, welcome back, welcome back.
All right.
And
Yeah.
we'll be back.
All right.
We'll be back.
See you soon.
See you soon.